Usually Schneier Levine, Rabbi Schneier Levine, introduces me as the political expert, and almost every time I decide not to talk about politics. And this time is no different. I don't want to talk about politics. I think none of us really want to talk about politics. If you really want to get a good grip on the political situation and what's happening now in the world, in Washington, it's very easy. I have a method that crystallizes it. You just go to Yeshiva Katana, to the kindergarten, and watch them, and then you could understand exactly what's going on now. You know, when the teacher says they bring that up, whatever you're playing with, bring it up, and the kid says, no, I'm not giving it. It's no different than not giving your tax returns. The Democrats say I want tax returns. I said, not giving it. And then one kid hits a kid, the other kid hits it back. Is that any different than the tariff war in China? Trump, I'm going to raise tariffs. China says we'll raise tariffs. So I mean, it really boiled down to a simple act. It lacks a certain sophistication in more politics. So I'm gonna move to a more comfortable topic, and which is Sefiras Haomer and this week's parsha. So as we get older, we get a more sophisticated view on our religion, on what we do, on the Yom Tovim and the other observances that we do. I think for a lot of people, Shavous and Sefiras Haomer, it's represented by, Shavous is represented by Matan Torah, the getting of the Torah, the Kabbalah Torah, and Sefiras Haomer is represented by men looking very hairy and no music. Like that's pretty much the kids are taught that, and that's what the feeling is. But what's really interesting is that if you look at the source, meaning I'm talking about just the Chumash, just the regular psukim, Sefiras Haomer and Shavous are not described that way at all. Sefiras Haomer and Shavous are described in very agricultural terminology. It's not described, it doesn't say anywhere in the Torah, in the Chumash, that was the day, that Shavous was the day that we got the Torah. It doesn't. It says it's something that was added on later. In the Talmudic times, they made calculations that day was also the day that the Torah was given, but that's not the real commemoration in the Chumash. Sefiras Haomer has nothing to do with the beards and the music and Lag BaOmer, nothing in the Torah. It doesn't say anything about that. That was much later. That was even after the times of the Beis HaMikdash, when Rebbe Akiva's Talmidim died. So what does the Torah say? So the Torah actually talks about agriculture a lot, and we do Daf Yomi, and we get to see in Daf Yomi all the Gemaras, all the Masechtas, and so many times we get the feeling that the references and the way the world worked back then was much more agriculturally sensitive. They knew about nature, meaning they reference. We just had a Gemara the other day that was referencing a certain size of, let's say, a miscarriage of an animal, and it talks about the warp and the woof of a loom, that size, and none of us knew where anything was referring to, but we surmised that these were things that were around in those days. People knew when you talked about cows and sheep and all these things that the Talmud discusses were a fact of life. An ox was a Mercedes to them. That's what it was. And when you had to bring a carbon, it was a big deal. And all the time you see people referencing things. So the Torah itself was given in that type of society. Now, Haomer, what is Sefiras? We say Sefira means to count. Omer, what's the Omer? Omer is a measurement. It's a measurement, a tenth of an ephah, and that was the amount of flour that was brought as a carbon on the second day of Pesach. So they would bring a carbon, a sacrifice on the second day of Pesach, called the Omer, and then they would bring another one on Shavous. And that is what the Chumash references. It's these two book-ending karbanos. Both of them were unique in their karbanos. We're not talking about animal sacrifice. They were talking about vegetation, talking about grains. So the first one, Sefiras Haomer, was a barley product. They ground up barley, and they would make a sort of like a bread, like a matzah type of bread, and that was that carbon. And the one in Shavous was a wheat carbon. It was made out of wheat. What's the significance of the barley and the wheat? Well, there's a very practical, again, we don't know, because we go to the store and it's in a plastic bag and it says barley on it. But we wouldn't know barley if it fell on top of us. You know, I once heard somebody explain that modern society is so sterile that even our meat comes in nice plastic packages, cubed, nice and red, with UPC, with the barcodes on them, with prices, with names. So we don't, and even the stores have little astroturf grass in the sections. So we're not killing animals. We're not slaughtering. We don't have anything to do that. We're buying, it's like you could buy potato chips, you could buy a pencil, and you could buy a piece of meat. We don't even associate it with the animal. So food to us is sort of distant. But in those days, the spring, Pesach, was the time where the crops would start to be harvested. That was the time when life would start sprouting and people would get their food. From Sukkot, Sukkot was it's called the Chag HaAsif. They would gather in all their food. Then you would have the long rainy period, especially in the Middle East, between then and Pesach. Pesach, things would bloom. The first thing that bloomed was barley. Now, barley is a lower form of wheat. Even now, we don't really eat bread with barley. They used it for animals mostly. So the carbon at Sefiras Haomer was a barley carbon, which was more animal-based. And then 7 weeks later, the wheat harvest would bloom, and that's when they would bring the wheat carbon, which was an elevated, more special, higher type of carbon. The barley was an animal food mainly, and then the wheat was for human consumption. Now the carbon that was born on Shavous is also unique because it was chametz, it was lechem, it was a loaf of bread. Usually those karbanos were all like matzahs, they were all flat. But on Shavous was one of the only times they would bring a chametz carbon. So, and when you look at the psukim, it's this week's parsha, you'll see that it says, count 50 days from the bringing of the Omer carbon, the barley carbon, until you bring the new carbon, mincha chadasha, the Shavous carbon. So, that's a little sophistication, meaning that means that Sefiras Haomer and Shavous are not necessarily tied into, they are tied into the things we know as kids, but there's another aspect which the Torah is obviously trying to tell us something. So what's the lesson in these bookending, unique, radically different karbanos? So one lesson I saw was that it connects everything. It connects both aspects of the Yom Kippur. The 50 days that we have from Pesach until getting the Torah are 50 days where we work to get ourselves better, to improve ourselves, and to be ready for that, to accept that way of life, the educated, higher way of life that the Torah gives us from Hashem, how to live life. But when we get out of Mitzrayim, we don't have it yet. We can't even necessarily differentiate ourselves from animals, because one of the arguments for vegetarians is that what right do you have to slaughter another living being that can think? Assuming they can think and they have feelings. You know, if someone's an invalid, we can't slaughter them just because they don't. If someone is in a coma and we don't necessarily know if their brain is working, we can't slaughter them. So why is an animal different? Maybe it doesn't have logic, or it doesn't. Right? That's one of the arguments. But the answer is that human beings have the ability to elevate themselves above animals. How do they do that? By living in an elevated way through the Torah. So the sequence and the evolution from barley to the wheat is the evolution that the carbon we bring at Pesach right away is symbolic of our starting point. We have to prove ourselves different than basic animals who are just living for what they see in front of them. We have to try and elevate ourselves to that higher level, to those lessons that are in the Torah, to eventually we're human beings. And we don't eat barley, we eat wheat in the form of rich bread, loaves, and hopefully we can all take part in this journey, and this Shavous will be true to ourselves and accomplish our potential.
Amen. Thank you very much.